Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I'm doing more hidden gem movies. Going through the alphabet, we're up to the letters G and H, and it's still fun, so I'm still going to do it. Let's start with the letter G. We're going to start with the 1997 David Fincher movie. It's a movie he made immediately after making Seven. There's a little film called The Game, with Michael Douglas, Deborah Kara-Unger, Sean Penn, and it's also got Carol Baker in it playing the housekeeper, which is kind of interesting. I rewatched this movie a day or so ago, and I've got problems with it, but I still like it. It's about a guy called Nicholas Van Houten, who's a rich guy. He's an investment banker, which immediately is two strikes against him, and he's a bit of an arsehole. In fact, he's a lot of an arsehole. He doesn't enjoy his life. He's still traumatized by the fact he saw his father jump off a roof and commit suicide when he was a kid. And his younger brother Conrad gives him a birthday present, a special experience which gets integrated into his own life. He goes and does a day of testing, and then suddenly he is deeply involved in a kind of theatre which is designed to strip away all his privilege and to get him to reassess his life. And it ultimately, possibly, leads to personal tragedy. Now, this one's an interesting movie. Fincher does a really good job of it. He gives not only the Michael Douglas character, but the audience off balance. There's moments when you watch it for the first time where you don't know what's real and what isn't. You don't know what's part of the game and what isn't. And you don't know where the movie is going, which is good. It works really well for that. The acting's really good. Deborah Kara-Unger does really good as somebody who's involved in the game. Sean Penn is less obnoxious than normal in his role. And Michael Douglas gives us one of those great, morally ambiguous characters for which he is incredibly well known these days. Not as bad as a few other people he played, but this one gives us a privileged character. And the problem I've got with this movie, he doesn't earn the redemption. He is manipulated into it. He's manipulated into having his epiphany and having the closure that he needs to kind of move on with his life. He still has his privilege, he still has his position, he still has everything he had previously, only he's a slightly better person. It feels like there's not skin in the game for the character in certain ways. He only thinks he has skin in the game. Nonetheless, it's a really interesting film. It's done crazily well. It takes us on a really nice trip through the manipulations of the company that runs the particular game. Those things I like, but that kind of climax doesn't feel earned to me. You should watch it because David Fincher's movies are always watchable, but rewatching it for this video, I had some problems with it. Next up, we've got a movie that I've never had a problem with and that I never will. It's my go-to New Year's Eve movie, and it has been for about 40 years now. The wonderful, terrific Get Crazy, directed by Alan Arkush, starring Malcolm McDowell, Alan Gorwitz, also known as Ellen Garfield, Daniel Stern, Gail Edwards, Miles Chapin, and a fantastic cast of musicians. It's basically set at the Saturn Theatre. It's the 20th anniversary of the Saturn Theatre, and Max Wolf, who runs the theatre, is giving it over to his assistant Neil. He's passing on the lease. He's going to get him to continue the music and the concerts at the theatre, but a very nasty property developer called Colin Beverley, whose henchmen are played by Bobby Sherman and Fabian, which is kind of cool as well, wants to redevelop the site. This movie plays with surrealism. It's got fantastic music in it. It's got Howard Kalin from the Turtles playing Captain Cloud, part of the band Captain Cloud and the Rainbow Telegraph. It's got Bill Henderson in it playing King Blues, who's a kind of B.B. King equivalent. It's got Laurie Eastside from Kid Creole and the Coconuts playing Nada, who has a kind of go-go style girl band. And it has Malcolm McDowell playing Reggie Wanker, who's a Mick Jagger kind of character and is a self-indulgent, a narcissist basically. And also it has Lou Reed playing folk musician called Auden, who is Bob Dylan by another name. Fantastic stuff, but it's surrealistic and it's wonderful. And it's a love letter to the film, or at least where Alan Arkush worked when he was young and saw all the great bands of the time coming through that place. It's a marvellous movie. It's a feel-good movie. It's hilarious. It's lovely. And I could watch it every week and still enjoy it every time. Then we get a bit of Canadian werewolf from the early 2000s and a trilogy of movies, of which I watched two, which are a lot of fun and have a lot to say about teenage relationships apart from anything else, while still being about werewolves. The Ginger Snaps trilogy. This is by Viavision. They put it out recently. It doesn't show any region coding if you want to get it. It's about a couple of sisters called Bridget and Ginger, played by Catherine Isabel and Emily Perkins, who are living their own little fantasy life. They have a very gruesome sense of humour. They're a little bit Addams Family prone. And suddenly Ginger has two things happen to her. One, she hits puberty and has her first period. And secondly, she's bitten by a werewolf. Both of those things conspire together to alienate her from her sister Bridget. And also, there's the other problem of she's biting and killing people. It's got its tongue firmly in its cheek. It's a nice movie. It has a lot to say about gender roles and the way teenagers circle around each other when the hormones hit. And it's a lot of fun to watch. Mimi Rogers has a very atypical role for her playing the mother. It's set in kind of wintertime Canada, or maybe early winter in Canada in a small town. And it has a lot of those small town tropes and that sense of isolation that particularly teenagers who don't conform feel in those kind of environments. It's a lot of fun. The second one, Ginger Snaps 2 Unleashed, is even more interesting. Ginger has been institutionalized, and in that institution is another young person, in this case a teenager, called Ghost, played by a teenage Tatiana Maslany, who becomes infatuated with Ginger. And that goes down a really dark path. In both of the movies, you've got some really nice monster effects. They're used very sparingly in the first one and a little more generously in the second one. By not showing them too much, they don't have to reduce the production value. And I saw Ginger Snaps when it first came out on video, and I enjoyed it then and I enjoy it now. It has a few things to say. It's got a lot of grounding in gender roles for teenagers, and it is very much a nonconformist entertainment, which gives us both werewolves and creepy teenage girls. So what more do you need? Next up, we've got a 1950s movie that, seen through a modern lens, is less of a piece of crap than a lot of people said it was at the time and in many decades since. Glen or Glenda. Ed Wood Jr.'s Glen or Glenda with Bela Lugosi, Ed Wood, Dolores Fuller and Paul Marco. It says on the cover of this, and this is a 20-year-old DVD at least, another turkey from the world's worst director ever. I think the ever is a bit redundant there. It's also kind of pseudo documentary about transvestites and other, what we would now label queer people. Because Ed Wood Jr. himself was a cross-dresser, it's a cry for acceptance and understanding, coming half a century before that even really got any traction in the public eye. And I've watched this recently and I liked it a lot more than I did earlier. Yes, rather than laughing at it, I came to the point of understanding the character and understanding what Ed Wood, in his own cack-handed way, was trying to say. It does have some sort of realistic and horror movie tropes in it because that's where Ed's head was at the time. An interesting part of the queer history of cinema, and I think it deserves a bit more respect than people have given it over the many decades since. This is from Avenue 1, which no longer exists as a company. Also has a whole bunch of Ed Wood original theatrical trailers in it. But reevaluating this one, I think I'm kinder toward it than I've ever been. It shows us that kind of quest for acceptance and that quest for realizing that human beings are on a lot of spectrums, including sexuality and gender. This is a step on the path. It may be a slightly wobbly and not well cemented in step, but it's definitely part of that narrative, and for that it deserves at least a modicum of respect. To finish off the G's, we've got something from 1980, a John Cassavetes film starring his wife, Gina Rowlands, Gloria. Now, Gloria is a killer good movie. Basically, Gloria, the character played by Gina Rowlands, is the ex-girlfriend of a high-level mobster. She was his mistress for a lot of years. She's now no longer his mistress, and she lives by herself. She's been set up in a nice apartment, and she's living her life on her own terms. Her next-door neighbour is a mob accountant who is about to take the books to the authorities. And the mafia, of course, hears about this. They put a hit on the guy and his family, and the guy and his wife are killed, but their child runs to Gloria's apartment and takes sanctuary in there. She's reluctant to do that because she knows what these made men are like. The mob hear about this and they put a hit out both on the kid and on Gloria. But Gloria's been around Goombas for a long time, and she's tough as nails. She knows what things are about. She knows who these guys are. She knows what they're capable of. She knows what their limitations are and who they are going to underestimate, including her. She really plays it smart in trying to get this kid really reluctantly out of the scopes of the mob. and it's really great. This is a character piece as much as it's a solid action film. It does a fantastic job of it. This was a commercial work that Gina Rollins and John Cassavetes did. He tended to take commercial jobs to pay for the movies he wanted to make. This one works, and a number of those. It works as a character piece, and it works as a really solid action film as well. I saw this one in the cinema, and I got blown away by the fact that the person shooting the bad guys isn't Charles Bronson and isn't Clint Eastwood, but it's Gina Rollins. And Gloria, this is an Umbrella release. Gloria is fantastic. Doing these hidden gems, I would be lost without the kind of movies that Umbrella Entertainment's putting out. For 20 years now, they've been putting out movies that weren't on anyone's radar, and they've got a lot of respect for smaller films. They don't get the chance to do the big blockbusters, but they'll dig deep and find films like Gloria, and this one I highly recommend. It is a fantastic piece of cinema. Then we move on to some Fritz Lang, because you've always got to have some Fritz Lang. This one's from 1943. It's in the middle of the war. It's when people didn't know how World War II was going to end. They didn't look at the last page of the book. And it's a movie which is a slightly fictionalized version of the assassination of Reinhard Heinrich, the Nazi right protector of German-occupied Prague. It's set in Czechoslovakia. He was a number 2 man in the SS, by the way, and chief mastermind of the Holocaust, and was known as the Hangman of Prague. And this one's called Hangmen Also Die, which has Brian Donlevy, Walter Brennan, not playing a cowboy geezer in this one, and Anna Lee and the story for the movie was written by Bertolt Brecht. And if you don't know who Bertolt Brecht is, you went to the wrong schools. He wrote the Threepenny Opera along with Kurt Weill. He also did Mother Courage. He did Caucasian Chalk Circle, all sorts of really great plays. And this is the only movie Bertolt Brecht wrote the story for. And it pulls no punches in saying that killing genocidal maniacs is the right thing to do. It is a really tough movie, particularly for Hollywood in the 1940s. And America went through an enormous pivot between the late 30s and the 1940s. There were a lot of pro-fascist groups in America in the 1930s. But when Pearl Harbor got bombed, they all either ran for cover or changed their stripes. But this one, in beautiful black and white with cinematography by James Wong Howe, is a movie you should check out. It's a hidden gem. It's not an enormously high-budget movie, but it's tough and it plays well to a modern audience because we know who the protagonists are going up against, and we know how that ended up, and we know what they did, which wasn't really known completely in 1943. That one you should get for, apart from anything else, it's one of those skinny DVDs, so it'll fit on your shelf with no too much trouble at all. We then go to the 1950s and a tough little drama, which only really got attention from people in the last 20 years. It was shown on late night TV a lot, here in Australia at least, and it's got such an enormously killer cast. It's about people driving gravel trucks in England in the 1950s. It's a movie called Hell Drivers, which has a killer cast. It's got Stanley Baker, Patrick McGowan, Sean Connery, Sid James, Herbert Lom, David McCallum, and William Hartnell, who went on to play Doctor Who for a while. It's about guys driving gravel trucks for a company. They've got to cover a round trip of 32 kilometres, and they've got to do about a dozen of these a day to keep their jobs. So the guy running the depot, played by William Hartnell, will sack anybody who doesn't do 12 in a day. And so there's an enormous pressure on these guys to drive fast and dangerously while they do their job. And the lovely thing about this too is that these are up-and-coming actors. Stanley Baker was the established actor, but McGowan and McCallum and Connery were up-and-coming actors who wanted their day in the sun. And they are out trying to out-act each other in the best possible way. It's a really solid little drama. It's a working class one too. It's not posh people arguing about inconsequential rubbish. This is working class guys who need these jobs badly and are trying to do their best to do them. There's your inside cover with McGowan being angry as hell. But there's a second disc which has episode of Danger Man and a little thing that Stanley Baker did for ITV in the 70s called Who Killed Lamb. And I like a disc like this that has a few extras on a second disc. It's always like getting a really nice dessert after a good meal. So Hell Driver should be in your collection. Really solid crime drama. Hidden gem, worth your time. Then we go from drama to comedy with Hellzapoppin, Ollie Olsen and Chick Johnson did a stage play called Hellzapoppin between 1938 and 1941 on Broadway, and it was anarchic as hell. Fourth wall was broken. People in the audience came up on stage and did things and did surprising stuff. It was surreal, it was anarchic, it was absurdist comedy as well. For instance, in the stage version, a guy dressed up as Adolf Hitler comes up on stage and starts talking with a Yiddish accent, which got pissed off the Nazis. And then Benito Mussolini comes up on stage in blackface, which again would have pissed off the fascists in Italy. So it was that kind of thing which had a lot of social commentary along with the anarchic humour. It also had a number of people of colour as performers. Slim Gaillard in his double act with his friend Slim and Slam was on there as well as the Harlem Kangaroo dancers who were jitterbuggers, which didn't sound right. They were a jitterbug crew, and they danced as well as part of the entertainment in Hellzapoppin. So if not an entirely integrated cast, they had representation in the stage version, and the movie version has that as well. You see Slim and Sam on here, you see the Harlem Kangaroo dancers. The interesting thing they did with this is they adapted the same style of humour to movies rather than stage, because obviously the mechanics and the world that is built by a stage production is very different from the world built in a movie. And they break the fourth wall immediately and they start going to absurd lengths. The movie starts with a dance sequence that turns into devils in hell doing all sorts of gags. And then it cuts to the movie's projectionist, who is played by Shemp Howard. And he is there trying to chat up his girlfriend, who's one of the usherettes in the theatre. And he can directly affect what's going on in the film. He does some interesting things which not only break the fourth wall, but break the illusion that movies are actually a world in themselves. And the production do that. It's also got Martha Ray in it. She does some singing and dancing. She's a lot of fun in it. And the interesting thing too is that she's playing a young woman who is unashamedly sex positive and horny. She's one of the cousins of one of the two Olsen and Johnsons. And so she's along for the gig they're doing at a posh party. And she's there to find a man, if not more. And that's alluded to as well in the movie. There's a really great scene with an archery range, which is mind-blowing. You wind that back to watch it again when you see it. It's mad absurdist comedy at a time when comedies tended to be a lot less crazy than this. This is not Marx Brothers crazy, where their characters are very firmly established. This is anything can happen comedy. And Hellzapoppin you should definitely watch and have a copy of. Unfortunately, the estates of Olsen and Johnson haven't allowed it to be re-released, which is a big shame. This is the kind of movie that needs a Criterion edition and some zhuzhing up with a bit of remastering. But unfortunately, we haven't got that at this stage. But Hellzapoppin, you should watch. Then we go to a French zombie movie, The Horde, also known as La Horde, which is from 2009. It's a great horror movie, a great zombie movie. Basically, here's the plot. I'm reading this off Wikipedia. A group of French policemen embark on a mission of vengeance after a colleague is killed by a notorious drug dealer. He is holed up in a condemned high-rise in the heart of a derelict and corrupt Paris neighbourhood. They storm the social housing complex with the intent of taking him down, but the operation is a failure and the team is captured. Suddenly both sides are confronted with altogether different opponents, zombies. Cops and criminals now must forge an alliance to fight the deadly onslaught. This is a rock-solid horror movie. The zombies are really icky, which is always nice, and they're fast-moving ones. These aren't your shamblers. These are full-tilt boogie, power-running. Again, it's a slightly unfamiliar background to most Anglophone audiences, and it's one of those nice zombie movies where you never quite know where it's going, and you enjoy the ride. I like this one a lot. It's the sort of movie that may eventually turn up somewhere like Tubi, but at the moment I don't think it is. There's a lot of gunplay, there's a lot of splatter, there's a lot of blood and guts. There's everything you want in a 21st century zombie movie. But few people talk about this one. They talk about all the other ones, 28 Days Later and all that. But nobody talks about The Horde. And they should, because it's a lot of fun. That then brings us to the last movie. 1981, directed by Joe Dante. It's not Gremlins. It's The Howling. Generated 7 sequels or remakes in the years afterwards, including an Australian set one, Howling 3, The Marsupials. And it's got a good cast. It's got Dee Wallace, Patrick McNee, Dennis Duggan, Christopher Stone, Belinda Belaski, Kevin McCarthy, John Carradine, Slim Pickens, and also Dick Miller turns up in it as well. It's based on a novel by Gary Bradner, and the lovely thing is too, the monster effects are done by Rob Bottin. So there's a lot of physical transformation effects in this one. And that works really, really well. I'll read you a bit of the blurb. In Los Angeles, several women are murdered within the space of a few days. A television channel gets a phone call from a man claiming to be the murderer. He prepares to meet a journalist, Karen White, played by Dee Wallace. The meeting must take place in the projection booth of a sex shop. Karen sees the man and screams. She gets traumatized by the incident and is sent to a place called the Colony for a bit of rest and recreation with her husband, which is run by Patrick McNee. The farm where the Colony is turns out to be full of werewolves. That's basically what you need to know about this one. Here's my problem. Patrick McNee, I've seen him in the Avengers. He was never a great actor. He was kind of iconic in playing John Steed, but in everything else he's been kind of mid. And in this one he's mid. Now this version of it has a trailer, teaser, and some of the werewolf effects and extras. But the Howling's one you can always go back to repeatedly. It's got everything you need from a werewolf movie and a horror movie of the 1970s, 1980s. Got a little bit of nudity in there, a little bit of sex, lots of blood and guts, lots of transformation effects, and a really nice ending as well, which I kind of liked. It plays off the humour versus the horror in a way that Joe Dante did and still does marvellously. And it's worth a rewatch. I may well rewatch the first three of these and have a bit of a session for myself with these. So there we go. We've covered G and we've covered H. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the notification bell. You can also donate to the channel at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got Wednesday coming up, and I'm doing a bit of a haul. I've been scrounging around and found some cool movies for a haul. Saturday, I've got Science Fiction Saturday. And again, next week, I'm going to be doing the next lot of these, which will be the letters I and J. And I've found enough movies in I and J to pretty much cover what I want to talk about. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some zombie movies, watch some werewolf movies, and I'll catch you next time.